Welcome to SEEK Bytes, a podcast by software engineers for software engineers. Today's episode is about distributed teams. We talk about the difference between remote and distributed teams, how to onboard members into a distributed team, the difference between good and bad asynchronous work, and why you should never plan meetings over the sacred lunch hour.
Welcome back to another episode of SEEK Bytes. Today on the podcast, we are going to be talking about distributed teams. And my name is Elliott Miller. Today I'm joined in Australia by William Lark.
Hello.
We're very excited because this is our first joint recording with the Australian team and the KL team. And our hosts and special guests today, we have Laavanya, who is the engineering director for Candidate. Welcome, Laavanya. And also joining Laavanya from KL, we have Jerome Chan, who is the head of engineering for Profile and Apply. So that is super exciting to have you both. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us.
Do you guys want to just give us a brief overview what you do at SEEK and what your kind of roles are?
Yep, let me go ahead first. So again, I'm Laavanya. I'm the engineering director for the Candidate place. So basically, I take care of everything related to Candidate when it comes to the SEEK online marketplace.
And I'm Jerome.
Nice.
I've been with SEEK for 7 years, close to 8, I think. And I've been working in different parts of SEEK for a bit now, most recently in the candidate space.
Well, we are so excited to have you both on board, and it is really great to get some of our KL team on board. We recently did our unification recording, so we had a couple of episodes of that, which was great, where we were talking to James Ross about the post-acquisition merger, which we called unification. Part of that was we joined the SEEK Asia teams with the ANZ team, so now we're just one big APAC team, which is exciting. But the first and foremost question is, did either of you have any part to play in that kind of unification journey where we merged those organizations into one?
Yeah, definitely. I think what was very interesting is that the unification of the team in candidate probably happened way before Laavanya joined the team.
Yep.
So the candidate engineering team was way ahead in terms of unifying the team, to form a true APAC team and operating in a distributed way. The higher engineering team, however, had that completed perhaps early last year. So that was probably the last bit of team unification that we did. So so that was really interesting, going through the journey, and we probably could talk a bit more about that as well later.
Since we are talking about distributed team, what's your understanding between a distributed team and a remote team? Are they the same to you, or are they different? What's your perspective on distributed versus remote teams? Yeah,
I guess the question is, and I know that term used a bit more interchangeably.
Exactly, there's been
in many conversations. If you're remote, you're distributed. If you're distributed, you must be remote, right? Which I don't think that's true.
Yeah, even when I was reading through, when I talk about what about distributed team, I only get about remote team, but there are slight nuances. But I wanted to get everyone's take on what y'all think the differences are between the two.
When I hear the two, I can kind of get that. You could be a distributed team, but nobody works remotely, in that everybody works from physical offices just in distributed locations, whether that's across one country or multiple. And, you could all be based in KL, but all work 100% remote as well. So, they may have some crossover, but they're not really the same thing. It does make sense. If you hear distributed, you probably think remote. Even though you may not be working remote, you may be physically working in an office, it probably feels remote anyway, because in order to have a Zoom across distributed locations, it's going to have to be online, right? You're not going to be able to have a meeting. I said a Zoom, but you get me. In order to have a meeting, you'll probably be on Zoom or some such technology. So
yeah, my understanding is same as you, Elliott. I mean, there are similarities, but they're not the same. I mean, you could be distributed and remote, or you could just be remote only, right? But, there are things like meetings and all that which tend to confuse as the same thing. But that was the first thing when I was trying to understand a bit more distributed, like to actually know what's the difference between the nuances of remote and distributed.
Yeah, I actually think remote is probably more of a individual personal approach to
Correct.
you getting things done, right? And distributed is really more of the team's approach to getting things done. So you could be remote and distributed, but you might be distributed but not remote. Actually, maybe working across 3 offices, for example.
Have either of you worked in a distributed team before, or was SEEK really that kind of first experience for you?
Personally, for me, I've been pretty much in a distributed team pretty much all my career, come to think of it. Yeah, I pretty much work only in distributed teams. So in SEEK, it's a bit easier because it's just all focused on APAC. So at least we don't have some of the challenges when you might face when you are in like 3 or 4 regions and you're probably working from day to the end, like following the sunrise. But yeah, I've pretty much worked in a distributed environment all my career. And I think the way how companies evolve pretty much, unless you're in a local startup, it's pretty much all companies I see nowadays are going towards distributed and remote working environment.
Yeah, I think in SEEK in particular, it's been very interesting pre-COVID and post-COVID, right? And also, I think unification changed a lot of ways how we structure our team and how we think in terms of operating more efficiently as well. Pre-COVID, I remembered, and these were the days when our teams were not unified and our systems were not unified. We would have teams that's co-located, working on very specific type of systems. However, in some of these teams, we would have product managers based out from different locations, for example. So that is, I suppose, distributed to some nature.
Yeah.
But definitely before that, we were very much co-located. I think, as we unify our team, and maybe that's also an effect of the pandemic itself, that we've become really truly distributed now. Yeah, so it's been quite a difference then and now.
I want to throw out 2 statements and just to get your ideas on what these mean to you, because certainly distributed team is a new term for me. So what do you guys think of these? The first one is, unlike remote teams, members of a distributed workforce all get the same benefits and perks no matter their location. And the second one is, remote work is a discipline of the individual worker, but distributed work is a discipline for the entire organization. How does that fit with your understanding of distributed versus remote teams?
I'm going to start with the later, and I think it's very much aligned with what Jerome said earlier. In remote is about an individual, whereas distributed, it talks a bit more about what the organization is aligned to. Remote is about your individual discipline coming in play, whereas distributed, to make it work in an organization, I personally believe that you need to have the right discipline or the right ways of working, the right agreement, the right processes in place to actually make it successful. So I certainly agree on the second statement. I'll let Jerome speak more.
Yeah, I share the same view as well. Like, to me, whether you're remote, you're hybrid, or you're working full-time from the office, that's your choice, or the organization's mode of working for an individual. But if you as a team or as a company decides that, hey, we're going to be operating distributed, that is, I think that's the team's remit. That's the conversation that the company as an organization needs to have and agree on. Yeah.
Regarding the first statement, though, I mean, if I understood, personally, I feel in a distributed environment, there might still be a bit differences in terms of packages on the remuneration, because we still need to follow what we call the local policies about it, right? So certain countries will have certain regulation of what certain things needs to be like. So I think there will still be a bit of nuances in terms of perks, but pretty much all companies I know of try very hard to bring that closer together. But we got to take into consideration the local market regulations as well.
Yeah, that was actually the first thing that came into my mind, that there is that market differences in terms of base and cost of living and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
And I know of an actual case of an organization, a pretty large organization, of people making a choice to move out from the States and to work in Spain. They took a pay cut just because, the cost of living is just lower there. I think that's fair. In terms of how we treat our team members, however, whether they're remote in the same office or not, I am of the view that, we should treat everybody the same. They're part of the team, and, we shouldn't make any differentiation in terms of that.
I would like to throw back a question to you, William and Elliott. So you have been through this process of unification and been SEEK for a long time. So you have also gone through the part where at the beginning your teams are predominantly co-located, and then over a period of time, right now we are all working in a distributed team. So maybe you can share some of your challenges or your insights, the differences between the two.
Yeah, sure. Will, do you want to? I think your tenure at SEEK's a little bit longer than mine. So do you want to start off on that one?
Has it really?
Haven't you been at SEEK for over 3 years?
Not yet.
But close to 3 years.
Very close, yeah. I guess it's for me it's definitely been different. I've never worked in a company where teams really are spread across Australia and APAC. That's what it is, right? I've only had it so where like we've had customers or just people you're talking to overseas. So it's definitely been very different with particularly like time zones and managing that. I think how we are, particularly at SEEK, it's a bit easy since time zones are only a couple hours difference at most. Work-wise though, since really everything has changed to remote work, and that was the standard for a few years, particularly during COVID, I feel like transitioning from like getting used to a remote team or a distributed team has kind of become quite natural. It happened quite naturally. Because even working with people here in Australia, we were already working remote. Like we wouldn't see people. I wouldn't see people. So now that it's just become the normal, it's kind of been an easy transition, at least for me.
Do you think it was always kind of remote like that at SEEK? Or was it, are you thinking kind of like post-COVID, it's become the norm?
I've only been at SEEK while everything has been like remote. I've never worked here before those days. So
okay.
I don't know. What about you guys? Have you, Laavanya, have you worked before then? Like how long have you been working distributed like this?
Well, I've been pretty much working distributed, as I said earlier, like all my career, but it's the level of, I don't know what you call it, the level of distributed team. Like, you could be like in a previous part where 3/4 of my teams are co-located and then I have 1 or 2 teams in Melbourne. Or it could be my peers are pretty much always been based in Melbourne, and my managers have pretty much based in different countries, right? So that's always been my experience so far. But I think I have a difference though between remote and distributed in terms of my personal experience. How I see it is, if I'm working remote, let's just say I'm taking an example with me and Jerome on most of the days. We are both working in different in our own places, wherever it is, right? But it is still different than, for example, if I'm going to work with you, Elliott, or William, because if I'm going to work across, I will also need to understand a bit on the cultural differences, like what is okay for you and what is different, like Jerome and you, there is still a bit of difference because we are from a different cultural background. So for me, working remotely and working with a peer remotely and working with a peer in a distributed environment, I do personally see a difference. Whether it's respecting the time differences, the cultural background, I definitely see some challenges and some benefits coming from that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting topic to talk about, isn't it? But then I have a few comparisons pre and post us being distributed and remote, right? Because we came from an environment whereby we're very co-located. People are in the office 5 days a week, essentially, right? And, in Kuala Lumpur with the traffic, you tend to perhaps stay a bit later before you leave just to, have an easier drive home as well. So I remember back in those days, we hired people by meeting them face to face. We meet our colleagues, our team members in the office every day. You literally know, who's been here, who's new, who's resigning, whose birthdays and all those things. I particularly find it very hard, especially post-pandemic. And we've moved, of course, to distributed then, of knowing who are the new starters, for example. Even in the same office, that has been a challenge. So you might know the face, you don't necessarily know, hey, this person is new. And I did feel as well at some point in time when we had a bit more of a new team members joining the company, and we did have a lesser in-office attendance as well at that point in time. I, at some point in time, felt that I was new in the office because everybody else was new and I've never met them before. So that was a very stark challenge for me, being a very collocated in-office kind of a team setup versus a distributed setup. So I thought I'd share that because for me, even though that you're in the same location, but because you're working distributed, it's just kind of hard to get to know people, even new people as well.
Yeah, I think the connection you have with your team member before we went distributed or remote versus after we went, it's just very different. You used to know everyone's birthdays and when people are living, and now it's definitely been different for me.
Laavanya and Jerome, what have you two found when it comes to dealing with differences in time zones? Have you found that's, not really an issue or it's particularly challenging when it comes to distributed teams?
I think specifically for me, in SEEK, the time zone is very manageable because it's 2 to 3 hours, which is quite nice actually. So it gives us a bit of coverage, whether that's, in the morning or in the evening, a bit later in the working day. That being said, when we've moved our higher engineering team into a distributed APAC team as well, we've had team members who have less experience working across time zones. They actually find it hard to adjust actually. So to your point, Elliott, about working with the team in Sri Lanka, right? So even though this is 2 or 3 hours, there are basic things around, what time is the best time for us to have our dailies? But it's lunchtime in KL or it's lunchtime there, or, so there are those things that has become a challenge. And it's interesting, some of our teams found ways to, instead of doing a stand up over Zoom call, let's just do Async, so those are some of the experimentations that the team has done. Personally, for me, I work across 6, 7, 8 hours, and that's quite okay. But I can understand if, a particular person hasn't had the chance or opportunity to work across time zones, that can be quite a shift for them as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think in SEEK, we are lucky it's just, especially like now it's 2 hours. The worst it goes is 3 hours, right? So we have plenty of overlapping time. I think one thing it helps a lot is, personally for me, making it clear what's the core hours for your team, right? That means you're saying, okay, between this and this, we would like to ensure that most of us are online, and unless there's a exception or what, and we'll try to have most of our meeting, including backlog, during the core hours, right? Because although it's only 2 hours difference, sometimes it could be, for example, when we have early meetings in Melbourne, it'll be about 7 a.m. here. And that's probably when the parents are dropping the kids at school, right? So I think establishing the core hours is probably very critical for me when we're trying to manage a team across distributed team. And I think there's also a bit of a cultural nuance, like lunch hour is sacred in KL, right?
Sacred, yes.
It is a sacred thing in KL. Like people get upset personally if you book over the lunch hours. That's also one of the biggest complaints. Like, why are we having meeting during lunch hours? And I'll be like, What is your lunch hour? How are we supposed to know your lunch hour? Right? And I think the other thing I feel is important for this is making sure the calendar is up to date. Like this question about when someone talked to me about lunch hour, I said, okay, block your calendar, state it's lunch hour. Like I feel like certain things are more important, because if you are in a co-located place, all you need to do is look, the person is there. Let me go and walk and talk to the person, right? But you don't have the same benefit here. So I feel like having core hours, keeping your calendar up to date, keeping your Slack status up to date if you're out of office or you're commuting and all that, for me, it really helps personally, because I do work quite odd hours as well. So I feel those are some things which I find quite useful for me.
Yeah, I think lunch hours when we were working co-located is literally a ritual. Because everybody's in the office, so it's literally a ritual. And I think now that, working remotely, it's not quite ritual, but it is still a very big and important thing for a lot of people. Yeah. And also, we've got teams actually working across Auckland, Melbourne, and also parts of Asia as well. So we need to remember that. So it's not just 2 to 3 hours differences for some of our teams.
Yeah, I was talking to someone today who was in a position where, so I feel like a lot of us, we've kind of been talking about people who are working perhaps full-time as distributed teams, but we also have contractors as well who may fit outside of these, these norms that we have. How do you guys kind of manage that when there's a contractor who perhaps may be more of a remote worker as opposed to, part of the distributed team, I guess, who's working in maybe a 6 or 7 hour time difference, and kind of helping, like, onboarding them into a distributed, team as opposed to just a remote worker. How do you guys kind of manage that?
I think it falls back to ways of working, right? I feel a team in a distributed environment needs to first come together and agree, this is how we're going to work, and we're going to take into consideration all the time zone differences and people's working preference. I feel that's one of the rituals we need to start or kick off in a distributed team, is just to agree, how are we going to do async communication? How are we going to have meetings? What are the hours? I feel these are important things to manage and discuss together. What about you, Jerome? How?
I feel that onboarding is a very important part of that process, right? So especially if you have new team members who is also a contractor who may or may not be working with, the company for too long, how do we then support in terms of onboarding of them, understanding what this means for them as well? And I think, Will, you took an example of 6-7 hours difference. I'm not sure whether we actually have that example here at all in KL, do we?
From KL to New Zealand, about 6 hours. So yeah, that's probably the most, I think.
Yeah. So the only example I can think of is India, is a very short-term work that we've done with a bunch of contractors, right? Now how we've done that is packaged the work very specifically for that team in India. And we do have somebody within SEEK that, manages that team and then work with different parts of the organization. That has worked for us. But then again, this is a very short-term bit of work. It's not something that, we expect to continue for years. Yeah. Some of our teams who have team members out in Auckland and different parts of Australia, so KL, that has been a challenge for them because we're looking at 5-6 hours time difference across all three or multiple locations in Australia.
Yeah. I think we are still pretty lucky in SEEK. I remember in my previous experience, we had Australia, KL, and US. So you literally have probably 1 hour time overlap at best when there's daylight saving.
And it's almost always like 11 or 12 at night in Malaysia when we have that meeting.
It was the opposite, right? But at that point, we had an agreement, look, we only have meetings when it is absolutely important. And each of us make a compromise, right? Either one person stays a bit later or the other person comes a bit earlier, and we rotate this. Okay, this sprint, this team comes a bit earlier, and this sprint, this team stays a bit later, just to make sure that we are fair across. I think that's one way they did. The other thing is, really getting good at async communication, right? I think that's probably where we start with the ways of working. I think when you have a very challenging time zone, you got to rely more on your async communication and the discipline of async communication, right? It's, you got to respond within a certain time and all that. So there are ways of working through this if your time zones are more spread across, but, it comes with discipline.
My view is that there's probably a point whereby distributed team doesn't make sense when a certain time zone difference is
yes.
So my past experience working in a different company, managing a team in California, for example, in retrospect of that, it wouldn't. I feel that it wouldn't have worked longer term to have, working in a distributed manner longer term as well. We did also years before was working very closely with our team in Sao Paulo, in our office in Sao Paulo as well. So that's a very, very challenging time zone for us, super challenging time zone for us. We didn't do distributed, but we did get into a point whereby we will have to support in terms of onboarding new team members, getting the team members up to speed and whatnot. And our team members have to work really late as well. Again, that's not sustainable long term as well. So my view is that, there's a point of diminishing return, I feel, if it exceeds a certain amount of time differences between locations.
The heart of it really comes back to what Laavanya was talking about when she mentioned ways of working. It kind of comes down to the team's way of working. When I started, I went from a purely Melbourne-based team to a team that had someone in New Zealand. We had a bunch of people in Melbourne, and then we had a bunch across Asia. The fact that we were in a distributed team wasn't really relevant because the team had such good ways of working already set up in terms of meetings and, Thursday being a flow day and whatnot. So by and large, it seemed to really work in terms of the shared meeting times. They were always outside of the lunch hour for Australia, and usually it was kind of from 1 p.m. onwards. So it would be before the lunch for, KL and Asia, but after the lunch for Melbourne. So it was kind of a narrowish window, but it seemed to really work.
And how was this done? Like, do you all come together as a team and agree this is how you want to do? Was it documented? Like, if someone new joins the team, how would they get to know all these ways of working?
There was a lot of processes that had been set out on Confluence, so there was a lot of reading to do, but also what the team was really good at was refreshing the ways of working. So every 6 to 12 months, kind of on schedule, we'd refresh it, much like with kind of agile ways of working. We'd touch base and be like, is this working? And even when we do each retrospective, people were comfortable saying, hey, I'm not really a fan of X. Could we try something else? So that really, really worked well. Everyone felt like they had a voice. So it didn't matter where you were from on the spectrum of time zones or, anything else. I think also when I joined, there'd been a bit of change in the team. So it made sense to do another ways of working check as well. But because the team had clearly been doing it for so long, it was a very well-refined process in terms of capturing how do we want to work, what's worked well in the past, what hasn't worked well. So that was a really interesting thing for me. How about you, Will? How did your team kind of figure out how they like to work? You came into SEEK in a distributed environment, yeah? Or
I don't know. No, the first team I worked at here at SEEK was they all lived here, but we all worked remotely. Like it was more of a remote working sort of thing.
Okay.
because we literally had no office at that point. The old office was closed. We didn't have this new one yet. It was kind of like up in the air.
So when you joined, it was like in the middle of COVID.
Smack bang in the middle, yeah. They were like, go home, stay home. But, show your face every now and then.
So that certainly would have made the ways of working particularly difficult, kind of outside of distributed teams.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was... The thing is, though, I feel like I've certainly changed throughout this whole process. Like, I'm usually quite an extrovert, but I feel like just working the way we do it maybe introverted me a little bit because now I spend so much of my time at home and even just working at home. But it certainly doesn't affect how I work. Like like I said, it's become so natural now that like jumping in and communicating with someone in Asia. To be honest, I often forget that this is how we work. Like I go by day to day, just forgetting that we have because it's just ingrained in me now that like we move meetings later in the day. Because we have people that, here at 9 a.m. is no one's awake in KL at that point. I don't know. It's been an easy one for me. I think the main one is just looking at all the public holidays at KL. It's amazing.
Man. Well, that is the most important benefit of working in KL, talking about
That's
benefits.
number 2 after the lunch ritual.
That's number 2 after the lunch rituals. Right. So I think you made a point about, when you came and everyone was working remote and, you were pushed to it. Like for me, I found that whole thing a big benefit for me. So I worked in a distributed environment before COVID, right? As I said earlier, like pretty much all my peers were based in a different location. My manager was based in different location. One of the things I faced challenge at that point of time is everyone is in a meeting room talking, and I'll be sitting down dialing separately in via Zoom, right? And this was before COVID days when we were all still co-located but distributed, right? One of the challenges I faced at that point of time is very hard to get your voice in when everyone else is in the meeting room except you and the Zoom. One thing COVID did very well, it pushed everyone to remote work regardless of the location you're in. And because everyone was remote work, all of us started focusing on the ways of working remotely better, which then benefited the distributed teams, right? So for me, COVID made the ways of working in a distributed team more effective, right? Because it really forced everyone remote regardless of your location. And now that we are back to hybrid, we are still practicing some of the ways of working. Like one good example we do in SEEK is, regardless whether you are in office or not, everyone dials into Zoom and look at the camera when you speak, so that even in the location, let's say everyone is in the office in Melbourne and someone is dialing in from KL, the person still gets heard because you're seeing everyone's camera, everyone's talking to Zoom. So for me, I found this COVID pushing everyone to remote a big boon for distributed ways of working.
Yeah, I share that same experience that it's very easy to alienate. Once you have a larger group in one physical location and a smaller group in one or multiple locations, it's very easy to learn. And that's not by intention. I think that's just how it is with human. And what was very interesting a few years ago prior to unification, when our leadership team in SEEK is so we got this part that we call SEEK Asia, and it was a very Asia-focused leadership team, having leaders in KL as well as in Hong Kong. And that was exactly the same problem when we have meetings. There'll be one meeting room in KL and there will be one meeting room in Hong Kong. Our leaders in Hong Kong will always tell us that, hey, we don't feel that we're included, right? Pretty much to the same example that Laavanya has mentioned as well. So one of the things, very interestingly, that was experimented, and we did it, and this was way before COVID, was that we said, hold on, everybody gets onto Zoom. And that's exactly what we did. And that essentially helped everybody to have the space and time to really listen and have a really good conversation. So that was a game changer, I feel, for us. And I also did notice that when the office started reopening in different countries, as well as we started to return to the office, and we sort of got back into the bad habit of meeting rooms in one location and other meeting rooms in one location. I think that probably was what you were talking about as well, Laavanya, that it eventually changed, right? Yeah, so yeah.
Yeah, so for me, like a good working tip for distributed working environment is, regardless, just dial into Zoom, look at the camera, because it helps when the team is imbalanced, which, in a distributed working environment, it's very hard to get all the team balanced or distributed equally. There's always going to be some teams that are going to be heavier in one region versus the other. And you want to avoid the part of feeling left out or, the sense of belonging in a meeting.
Yeah, and talking about Zoom meetings, I find one of the most important things is to switch on your camera.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely important.
Yeah. That's a good point. Like that, I don't know about you, Elliott and William, like one of the challenges or something which irks me is I go to a meeting one-on-one and someone doesn't turn camera on, and I'm like, okay, who am I talking to? Right? Like I feel like there should be, again, maybe come back to ways of working. Like if you are distributed, turning camera on should be a must. Of course, there's going to be an exception, sometimes a kid playing around or something like that. But, some practices should be normalized, I feel.
What Jerome mentioned about the game changer of Zoom, absolutely. I think COVID, a big silver lining there was it was a great equalizer because everyone was working remotely. When I onboarded, everyone was so used to working remotely that it didn't matter that we actually had people in different regions across Asia. I mean, one of the leads on my team was actually in Melbourne, but they just worked full-time remote. So, it didn't matter if I was in a meeting with them or in a meeting with someone in Asia or New Zealand. It was everyone was treated the same. Everyone was still equal. I've definitely seen it where you have a big group in one meeting room and then one or two people on Zoom. And yeah, it definitely makes it more difficult. You do kind of feel left out or alienated. It does make the meeting a lot harder to run because face-to-face, people just kind of talk amongst themselves even. And so it does change the dynamic. But everyone being on Zoom, I think it works really, really, really well. So,
yeah, I'm a bit the same. I certainly feel like cameras should be on for the most part. Some exceptions. I think when I'm eating, I will turn it off. I feel weird eating in front of people. Yeah. But I feel that is just a challenge with just distributing a team, is that you still want to keep those emotional connections with people, right? Just because you're not in person with people, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be connecting with people. If we're chatting with cameras off, we could almost just be chatting over Slack. Like part of that is I want to see people still as well, seeing the team, seeing who I'm talking to, makes a big impact. But I feel like a lot of these have been like individual like challenges as well. Like how do our How do our individuals in the team, how do we onboard them and get them working? What do you think are some business benefits for distributed teams? I know it was mentioned earlier, there are some times when having a distributed team just isn't the case or could work. When is a good time? I guess what are the benefits of having a distributed team for the business, and any more things of when it wouldn't work or why it shouldn't be looked at?
I think one of the advantages, the other thing we didn't talk much about is the access to talent, right? Now you've just duplicated or, you have just replicated the number of talents you have access to. One location versus multiple location. I think that's, for me, one of the biggest advantage I see in a distributed team. And the other bit is, of course, the diversity itself. It's different people, different culture, different ways of thinking. That's always something which is going to benefit, especially when it comes to innovation or the approach towards thinking. What about you, Jerome? What else do you think?
Absolutely. I think that's definitely the first thing, right? Because then you could ask anyone in tech and they would say, oh, recruiting is really, really challenging. It takes a lot of time. Where is our pool coming from, right? So I think having that option of remote and, for people being, able to work remotely benefits us a lot. So I'll give an example. We have quite many individuals actually working remotely from Penang, for example. And Penang is such a beautiful island.
I agree. My hometown.
Your hometown, yeah. And great food, so that's super important for us as well. And I have had the opportunity to try to hire from Penang in the past, not in this organization. And you find talents there, but they refuse to move into Kuala Lumpur. Just because, it's such a different lifestyle, right? So just having that option of people being able to work remotely, you gain access to these talents as well. So, which is great. I think, I think that's really one of the immediate benefits that we reap from, being able then to, have people working remotely in a distributed manner. Yeah.
What about you, Elliott and William? How do you see right now, from coming to a co-located team and now distributed team, what are the benefits you see working in these teams?
The diversity factor, I'm a big believer in that every member of the team has some value to add, regardless of, their level of seniority. Each person has their own experience, and so they will have a different way of thinking and they will have faced different problems. So then once you add on the diversity of we're coming from different cultures as well, there is more benefit to be had from that diversity, because people of different backgrounds will have different ways of thinking as well as problem solving. I think the other things which may seem a bit funnier is, the entire office doesn't shut down on a public holiday, so all work doesn't grind to a halt, which is kind of a benefit there, when you're diversified across regions. And it kind of means you get more support as well across different hours. So if you have customers that are outside of the 9 till 5, it's you kind of get that added benefit that you have team members who can actually support greater operating hours within the business.
Yeah, I think for me, I was trying to figure out the best way to word it. But for me, it's we work, and I think this just relates mainly to SEEK and how we work, because we have an APAC product, right? We have SEEK, we have JobStreet. We work with multiple things, but it never feels like we're working with a separate country. I feel like it does feel like we're unified, and even if we are talking about not just SEEK.com.
It sounds to me like there isn't the idea of us versus them. Right.
Yes.
It's just a single identity. It's just us, because we're all equal. We're in a distributed, ways of working. Right. So there's no us versus them. It's, instead of this location versus that location, or this team versus that team, we're just a single team.
I think that's a testament if distributed working is done correctly. I've been in situations when we were struggling, and it very quickly goes to us versus them. This region. It can very quickly go wrong, if we don't get it right at the beginning. And I think it all comes back. I know we are repeating it again and again, but that's because the importance of it, the ways of working and getting everyone on board. And, I think one thing Elliott mentioned, refreshing the ways of working every now and then is very critical, so that, we are going in as a team rather than different locations, right? one of the things I think we have yet to call out is just the amazing career opportunities you're going to have across in a distributed team, right? Like one of the biggest advantage I've seen me coming in SEEK was because we are fully distributed, there's no such thing, oh, this role has to be in Melbourne or this role has to be in KL. Anyone can apply for any role. And you are working, your peers can be based in Melbourne, your peers can be based in New Zealand. So, career opportunities are just wide and they're not restricted to where you're working. So that is for me, a really big plus in a distributed team done right.
I think it's also worth adding that, we have the opportunity to move countries but stay within the organisation and in some cases even stay within the team that you're already in. The idea that you could say, I'm going to move from the Australian office to the KL office and nothing else kind of changes in terms of, your day-to-day. It's like, well, I still am on the same team working on the same product and the same thing. Like that's pretty cool. I don't know how many jobs you could do that for.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's many out there. Like you can do, I think that's for me a very big advantage in a distributed team. Limitless opportunities because you're not restricted based on the region. We've been talking about all the good things and maybe it's time to talk about some of the challenges which comes to a distributed team.
Well, there was one thing that really came up in the talk with JR about unification, and that was the cultural differences. One of the questions that kind of came up was, how often do we offend you? Like, because we're very culturally different in Australia to Asia.
I don't think offend is or maybe because I'm quite used to it, I don't think offend is probably the right word. I think one of the things I do see is in a meeting room, for example, when you have a lot of Australian folk versus and a few Asian folks, I think Asians are more introverted. I don't know. They do not speak out as much. So sometimes the voices go unheard of. I think that's probably a biggest cultural difference I see. And the way we look the way we look at authority is also very different. What about you, Jerome?
Yeah, so I think there's the cultural aspect that can't speak for the entire Asia because we're so diverse, right? But for Malaysia in particular, the culture is very collective. So whenever you're in a meeting, you might find it very hard for a single individual, except maybe for Laavanya, for example. People take time to look at other people and think about what's important for the other people in the room as well. So that may be the reason why they're not ready to speak up in that meeting. But a lot of chatters happens after the meeting. And I think in more Western culture, for example, individualism is a more important thing. I think that might be contributing to the fact that there's more individual voices being heard in those kind of meetings. So there are those things as well. And I remember watching a video talking about what they call reading the air in the Japanese culture. So it's not so much of words that's being said about how the person or the audience actually feels about something. It's about you reading and looking into their body language to know how they're feeling. So the nuance of that is, in different cultures, it is so big and it's so different that, sometimes make it very hard for, people of other cultures to really understand what's happening. Yeah. So that's definitely one of the challenges, isn't it? Like you sometimes walk in the meeting room and, you expect a really good conversation and it just go crickets really, really quiet.
Yeah, I mean, when I manage teams, one of the things I have is previously, so my teams at times are predominantly based in KL, and then I work with a team maybe in US, and I will go in, and the US will blah, 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 and we'll be sitting down quietly. I'll be like, okay, that's very awkward. A lot of times I try to fill in the gaps, but I'm like, okay, this is getting awkward. And then I go to my team, guys, what's happening? Can you all speak? It's like, I don't know when to speak. I don't have room to speak. A lot of that comes. And maybe that's where the facilitation of a meeting comes into play, whether, okay, let's all take some time and put post-it notes so that, something like that, right? I think this is probably where a good facilitation can help some of these challenges we have in a meeting.
Yeah. And the other thing that I can think of, I think it's more country specific, but again, it's generalizing, right? Which is the concept of time. There is such thing that we call the Malaysian time. Do you want to talk a bit more about that, Laavanya?
I don't really feel it.
Please
here.
drop,
Well,
drop
not
some
so much
knowledge bombs on us.
in the context of SEEK. I think we're doing it very well. Our meeting usually starts quite on time. Might be that 3 minutes plus
Yeah.
minus, right? But then in general, when we talk about Malaysian time,
I think Malaysian time for me in context outside work. I think in work it doesn't really play that much, personally for me at least.
yeah. So for Elliott and Will, when I talk about Malaysian time, there's this culture of you're meeting a friend, for example, and he or she might be late. In my standard, late is 5 minutes is late. So you might be texting and say, "Hey, where are you?" And say, "I'm on the way. I'm really near," but really they're just still just getting ready from home and an hour away. So that's Malaysian time in general. Yeah.
I feel I've definitely heard that. Not specifically Malaysian time. I feel like every culture has their version of Malaysian time.
I agree.
Right. Well, luckily for us, our meetings don't start 1 hour later, so we're pretty good at that.
In Japan, even if you're 1 minute late, it's unforgivable, right? So it's very different in different countries how they look at time.
Yeah, it's very understandable. I feel like in countries like Japan, for example, public transportation are really, really efficient.
Yeah.
So 1 minute is really late. And when you look at other countries whereby people need to take buses or whatnot, like people will wait for hours or something, even days, just because it's just really hard to get there. So I think country to country there is that difference in terms of that concept of time or what is being late.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I guess it goes back to Async. Like you always want to make sure that people are able to catch up on information even if they're not going to be there. So it probably falls back to the Async ways of working.
Yeah, one of my very personal challenge with Async is that I feel that there's a lot of things going on. And I remember I was talking to Laavanya about this topic last week, and Laavanya said to me, like, Async done right. Do you want to talk about what that means, though, Laavanya, Async done right?
Well, firstly, I'm no expert in Async ways of working, but I think where it is, Async, if it's done wrongly, it can be overwhelming because Async is not meant you're always looking at Slack messages. You're always looking at Outlook. That is too distractive, right? But for me, Async comes up where there are disciplines of when or how you want to reply certain messages. Like one example I can give, we had in Slack, right? You can't always look at the channel messages because sometimes people are just talking some random stuff, right? But you can have an agreement with the team. I'm going to have 2 Slack channels. One Slack channel you always need to look at because we might only put really important information, so turn on your notification. The other Slack channel goes in terms of random messages or things like which you can look at another hour. You don't need to reply instantaneously. Right. So having this kind of agreement for me in Async is important. Similarly, let's say we have Async backlog reviews. Like what are the things you need to come in and respond? Like one of the things we're experimenting within the candidate leadership is Async checking once a week. Each of us, there's a set of questions we respond. And this is where also we ask, how are you doing? And tell me something personal. Right? Not related to work. What we realize, it really helps the part of getting to know a person beyond work. And that's something we find can really go missing in a distributed or a remote work because we are so used to coming in and just talking about work. All the water cooler chats disappears. So for me, Async done right is probably having, again, coming back to ways of working or ways, agreement of what we need to do and having the discipline to commit to what you've agreed to it, right? And for me, in Async, it's also a precursor to having proper flow time.
We mentioned before, how often do we offend you? Maybe that's not the right phrasing, but how often in your experience, do Australians come across as rude compared to, say, Asian culture and Asian norms?
Honestly, maybe I've worked with different regions. I don't find Australian culture rude. I've been in a situation where I came out of a meeting and not working with the Australian team is a different one. I'm like, oh my God, why is everyone so rude? Why is everyone scolding or shouting? And then I realized that's not rude. That's just how they communicate. And it was something we all experienced. At the end of the day, we all had to go for some cultural training to understand how people communicate. But Personally, if you're just focusing on how do I find Australian root, no, I do not. But I do find there's a bit of difference in the slang or the terms we use, right? And I keep sharing this joke where the first few weeks I joined SEEK, someone told me SEEK gives thong. And I'm like, what? Thongs? Like, really? Like, SEEK gives thongs? Like, are you sure? And I was like, oh my God, did I join the right company? And then it took me some time. All right, thongs are actually slippers. Like, thongs for me is lingerie, right? So I do find that a bit, but personally, when rudeness is probably not something I would say my experiences.
Yeah, I wanted to bring this tool that we used quite a bit with our teams when we were doing the unification of our teams. So it's called the culture map. So that's one done by Erin Mayer. So there's a website that is really good. It talks about the different levels of approach to disagreement. So you would have on the other end of the spectrum really just avoids confrontation, and on the other spectrum is really just value confrontation. So I think that's what we're seeing. Sometimes with the level of disagreement, you got one part that is probably quite vocal and quite direct with the input. I'm disagreeing on this, coming from the right intention and all of that. And then the other person who is on the other spectrum really just don't enjoy that confrontation. So I think that's what's happening. So we've used this tool quite a bit in with some of our teams as well. I think that's also part of the important bit when we do cultural training as well for our teams that's going through the unification, working across different cultures as well as many different teams. What I really like about this, and I think this worked really well for tech, is that it's data oriented. There's actual data that you can take a look. There's profiles that you can for small fee. You can have that done on the website for individuals, also for the team. So it really gives you the view of where is it actually, and people actually understand and have a very good conversation around what those actual differences are and why is it there.
Yeah, are there any other tools that you find help with distributed teams?
Well, I don't think it needs to be specifically any tool. I think it is, providing that environment for people to talk about it safely. Why is it happening? Why is that, person saying this, or why is this person very quiet in the meeting? Just really talking about it. So I don't think teams should feel that they're restricted, that, there must be a certain frameworks, because, not all the teams have the privilege to have all these tools, paid tools and whatnot as well, right? They may not have access to it. I think it is really just creating the environment and say, hey, let's talk about it. And I think for us, retrospective is an excellent place for teams to actually talk about these issues.
I think retrospective is probably a place where if there are and you're feeling any differences, that's probably where we should be voicing out things. For me, it's not about the tools, but actually how you use the tools, right? I think there's a lot of tools out there, but not every time you're using them correctly.
This has been a very fascinating conversation. I've definitely learned a lot. I wanted to kind of start wrapping this up, but I thought maybe to end it, what advice would you give to either an individual or a manager or a team looking to start working in distributed teams for the first time? What's one kind of piece of advice you'd kind of give someone?
Yeah, I would just use one word: communicate. Really, really take the time to communicate. So don't underestimate the importance of communicating. You may feel that you are over-communicating, but communicate anyway.
Well, if I'm going to go, probably tagging on top of communication, it's assumption, right? Don't always assume the worst. If someone said something, don't assume the person is rude. Try to understand the background of the person, that's coming with that's tagging on communication. But the other thing, if I really like to emphasize a distributed working environment, is I think there's two things here: is really working with your teams on the ways of working and really improving the Async working style as well. I think that's, for me, a big bonus or a big advantage for a distributed team.
Yeah, amazing. This has been great. I came into this not knowing anything about distributed teams. I didn't even know what the word meant. And I feel like now I can explain it to people. So thank you very much. I think it was a pretty good APAC, KL and Australia podcast. Yeah, hopefully we'll see you guys on another episode of this, hey?
We'd love to have you back. Thank you so much, both of you, for being on board for our first KL Melbourne recording of SEEK Bytes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Elliott and Liam. Bye-bye.